This is chapter 4 of volume 2 of Pride and Prejudice, or if you have a book that is not divided into volumes, this is chapter 27. With no greater events than these in the Longbourn family, and otherwise diversified by little beyond the walks to Meryton, sometimes dirty and sometimes cold, did January and February pass away. Oh, 2 months went by just like that in one sentence. The end. Goodbye. Marge was to take Elizabeth to Hunsford. She had not at first thought very seriously of going thither, but Charlotte, she soon found, was depending on the plan, and she gradually learned to consider it herself with greater pleasure as well as greater certainty. Absence had increased her desire of seeing Charlotte again and weakened her disgust of Mr. Collins. Oh, so remember how I said time heals all wounds? I guess, she misses Charlotte now, and she also doesn't feel as disgusted with Mr. Collins because she hasn't seen him for a while and time has passed. There was novelty in the scheme, and as with such a mother and such uncompanionable sisters, home could not be faultless. A little change was not unwelcome for its own sake. The journey would moreover give her a peep at Jane, and in short, as the time drew near, she would have been very sorry for any delay. Oh, good. So she's going to go see Jane on her way to Charlotte's. Very good. Everything, however, went on smoothly and was finally settled according to Charlotte's first sketch. She was to accompany Sir William and his second daughter. The improvement of spending a night in London was added in time, and the plan became perfect as plan could be. The only pain was in leaving her father, who would certainly miss her, and who, when it came to the point, so little liked her going that he told her to write to him and almost promised to answer her letter. The farewell between herself and Mr. Wickham was perfectly friendly. Okay, so she said goodbye to him. Maybe she's going to be gone for a while. On his side, even more. His present pursuit could not make him forget that Elizabeth had been the first to excite and to deserve his attention, the first to listen and to pity, the first to be admired, and in his manner of bidding her adieu, wishing her every enjoyment, reminding her of what she was to expect in Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and trusting their opinion of her, their opinion of everybody, would always coincide, and there was the solicitude and interest in which she felt must ever attach her to him with the most sincere regard. So she's saying, we understand each other, like, about everything, and, we're going to be special to each other forever, I guess. Or at least he will be to her. And she parted from him, convinced that whether married or single, he must always be her model of the amiable and pleasing. He's the model guy, I guess. Dang. That's crazy, right? So she's going to judge everybody or all the other guys or compare them to him? Should do that. But anyway. Her fellow travelers the next day were not of a kind to make her think him less agreeable. Sir William Lucas and his daughter Maria, a good-humored girl, but as empty-headed as himself, had nothing to say that could be worth hearing, and were listened to with about as much delight as the rattle of the chase. How rude! Elizabeth, she doesn't want to hear what he has to say, and she says it's as enjoyable as the sound of the chains from the carriage. That's sad. Elizabeth loved absurdities, but she had known Sir William's too long. He could tell her nothing new of the wonders of his presentation and knighthood, and his civilities were worn out like his information. She was just so tired of hearing his crap all the time, same stories over and over. It was a journey of only 24 miles, and they began it so early as to be in Gracechurch Street by noon. As they drove to Mr. Gardner's door, Jane was at a drawing-room window watching their arrival. When they entered the passage, she was there to welcome them, and Elizabeth, looking earnestly in her face, was pleased to see it healthful and lovely as ever. On the stairs were a troop of little boys and girls whose eagerness for their cousin's appearance would not allow them to wait in the drawing-room, and whose shyness, as they had not seen her for a 12-month, prevented their coming lower. How cute! All was joy and kindness. The day passed most pleasantly away, the morning in bustle and shopping, and the evening at one of the theaters. Elizabeth, so they're visiting Jane, and we know that Jane is with the Gardners right now, right? So they got there, they were excited, they said hello to everybody, they spent the morning shopping, and now they're at a theater watching whatever show, right? Elizabeth then contrived to sit by her aunt, Mrs. Gardner, because they were really good friends, right? Or they speak well with each other, they trust each other. Their first subject was her sister, so they're talking about Jane. And she was more grieved than astonished to hear, in reply to her minute inquiries, that though Jane always struggled to support her spirits, there were periods of dejection. Oh, so Jane is struggling because of Mr. Bingley. Oh, she doesn't feel very good. So it was reasonable, however, to hope that they would not continue long. Well, good. Mrs. Gardiner gave her the particulars also of Miss Bingley's visit in Gracechurch Street, and repeated conversations occurring at different times between Jane and herself, which proved that the former had, from her heart, given up the acquaintance. Oh, good. So Elizabeth now has a little bit more proof or satisfaction that Jane is not going to try and be friends with Miss Bingley any longer. Mrs. Gardiner then rallied her niece on Wickham's desertion and complimented her on bearing it so well. So now they're bringing up Wickham. He's like, ooh, so tell me more. What happened? But my dear Elizabeth, she added, what sort of girl is Miss King? I should be sorry to think our friend mercenary. Pray, my dear aunt, what is the difference in matrimonial affairs between the mercenary and the prudent motive? Where does discretion end and avarice begin? Last Christmas you were afraid of his marrying me because it would be imprudent, and now, because he is trying to get a girl with only £10,000, you want to find out that he is mercenary? So she's basically like, oh my gosh, is he like being a jerk and trying to marry this girl only for her money? And she's like, oh my gosh, you just said that I shouldn't be with him because of money. Now you're upset with him for being with somebody for money? You know, she's like, make up your mind. If you will only tell me what sort of girl Miss King is, I shall know what to think. She's a very good kind of girl, I believe. I know no harm of her. But he paid her not the smallest attention till her grandfather's death made her mistress of his fortune. No, why should he? If it was not allowable for him to gain my affections because I had no money, what occasion could there be for making love to a girl whom he did not care about and who was equally poor? She's like, well, she was poor at one time. Why would he talk to her? And he didn't even like her like that. But there seems indelicacy in directing his attentions towards her so soon after this event. A man in distressed circumstances has not time for all those elegant decorums which other people may observe. If she does not object to it, why should we? Her not objecting does not justify him. It only shows her being deficient in something herself, sense or feeling. Well, cried Elizabeth, have it as you choose. He shall be mercenary, and she shall be foolish. No, Lizzie, that is what I do not choose. I should be sorry, to think ill of a young man who has lived so long in Derbyshire. Oh, if that is all, I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Derbyshire. She's like, oh, the men that live in Derbyshire, no, I have a poor opinion of them. So, like, who lives there? It's Darcy, right? And their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire are not much better. Okay. I am sick of them all. Thank heaven I'm going tomorrow, where I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither manner nor sense to recommend him. She's talking about Mr. Collins. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing after all. Take care, Lizzie. That speech savors strongly of disappointment. Elizabeth's being a little bitter, right, about men. Before they were separated by the conclusion of the play, she had the unexpected happiness of an invitation to accompany her uncle and aunt in a tour of pleasure, which they proposed taking in the summer. Oh, so at the play, because they were at the theater, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner invited her to go on a trip in the summer, and a pleasure trip. So they're just going to travel for fun. We have not quite determined how far it shall carry us, said Mrs. Gardiner, but perhaps to the lakes. No scheme could have been more agreeable to Elizabeth, and her acceptance of the invitation was most ready and grateful. My dear, dear aunt, she rapturously cried, what a delight, what felicity! You give me fresh life and vigor. Adieu to disappointment and spleen. What are men to rocks and mountains? Oh, what hours of transport we shall spend! And when we do return, it shall not be like other travelers without being able to give one accurate idea of anything. We will know where we have gone. We will recollect what we have seen. Lakes, mountains, and rivers shall not be jumbled together in our imaginations, nor, when we attempt to describe any particular scene, we will begin quarreling about its relative situation. Let our first effusions be less insupportable than those of the generality of travelers. So Elizabeth's super excited about going on her trip with her aunt and uncle. Okay, volume 2, chapter 5, or chapter 28, if you do not have a book that is divided into volumes. Every object in the next day's journey was new and interesting to Elizabeth, and her spirits were in a state for enjoyment, for she had seen her sister looking so well as to banish all fear for her health, and the prospect of her northern tour was a constant source of delight. Good. When they left the high road for the lane to Hunsford, every eye was in search of the parsonage, and every turning expected to bring it in view. So they were on the carriage and they were just looking around because they'd never been there before. And every time they turned, they thought they were going to see Charlotte's house. The paling of Rosings Park was their boundary on one side. Elizabeth smiled at the recollection of all that she had heard of its inhabitants. Well, we know who lives at Rosings. That's Lady Catherine de Bourgh and her daughter, right? At length the parsonage was discernible, the garden sloping to the road, the house standing in it, the green pales and the laurel hedge. Everything declared they were arriving. Mr. Collins and Charlotte appeared at the door, and the carriage stopped at the small gate, which led by a short gravel walk to the house, amidst the nods and smiles of the whole party. In a moment they were all out of the chaise, rejoicing at the sight of each other. Oh, so they're all saying hello to Charlotte. They haven't seen her in months, right? Mrs. Collins welcomed her friend with the liveliest pleasure, and Elizabeth was more and more satisfied with coming when she found herself so affectionately received. She saw instantly that her cousin's manners were not altered by his marriage. His formal civility was just what it had been, and he detained her some minutes at the gate to hear and satisfy his inquiries after all her family. So he stopped her at the gate and was like, how about this? They didn't even go inside. He was just asking her a bunch of questions. They were then, with no other delay than his pointing out the neatness of the entrance, taken into the house. And as soon as they were in the parlor, he welcomed them a second time with ostentatious formality to his humble abode, and punctually repeated all his wife's offers of refreshments. They're just super happy that they're there. Mr. Collins just talking a lot and repeating himself. Elizabeth was prepared to see him in his glory, and she could not help fancying that in displaying the good proportion of the room, its aspect and its furniture, he addressed himself particularly to her, as if wishing to make her feel what she had lost in refusing him. So he was pointing out everything in his house and, making it seem as if, like, hey, this could have been yours, girl. Well, I mean, at least that's what Elizabeth thinks. We don't know if he's actually doing that. But though everything seemed neat and comfortable, she was not able to gratify him by any sigh of repentance. So she was not going to give in and be like, oh, well, I guess I could have lived here. No, she's not going to do that. And rather looked with wonder at her friend that she could have so cheerful an air with such a companion. She looked at Charlotte like, dude, for real? Like, you're happy here? Well, you look happy, but dang. When Mr. Collins said anything of which his wife might reasonably be ashamed, which certainly was not unseldom, she involuntarily turned her eye on Charlotte. Once or twice she could discern a faint blush, but in general Charlotte wisely did not hear. So whenever Mr. Collins was embarrassing or something weird, Elizabeth would look at Charlotte and be like, let me see, how is she going to react? And Charlotte maybe every now and then would blush, but after a while, more often than not, she'd just be like, that's him, that's how he is. After sitting long enough to admire every article of furniture in the room, from the sideboard to the fender, to give an account of their journey and of all that had happened in London, Mr. Collins invited them to take a stroll in the garden, which was large and well laid out, and to the cultivation of which he attended himself. So now he wants to show them the garden, and that's what they do for fun. To work in his garden was one of his most respectable pleasures, and Elizabeth admired the command of countenance with which Charlotte talked of the healthfulness of the exercise, and owned she encouraged it as much as possible. She's like, oh no, Like, I encourage him to go to the garden and work as much as he can. I wonder if she's trying to get rid of him. Here, leading the way through every walk and crosswalk, and scarcely allowing them an interval to utter the praises he asked for, every view was pointed out with a minuteness which left beauty entirely behind. He could number the fields in every direction and could tell how many trees there were in the most distant clump. But of all the views which his garden or which the country or the kingdom could boast, none were to be compared with the prospect of Rosings, afforded by an opening in the trees that bordered the park nearly opposite the front of his house. It was a handsome modern building, well situated on rising ground. So he's like, oh no, you think this place is nice? I mean, nowhere in the country is nicer than Rosings. We know. I think he's infatuated with Lady Catherine and Rosings. Anyway. From his garden, Mr. Collins would have led them round his two meadows, but the ladies, not having shoes to encounter the remains of a white frost, turned back. And while Sir William accompanied him, Charlotte took her sister and friend over the house, extremely well pleased, probably, to have the opportunity of showing it without her husband's help. It was rather small, but well built and convenient, and everything was fitted up and arranged with a neatness and consistency of which Elizabeth gave Charlotte all the credit. So it was nice and cozy. When Mr. Collins could be forgotten, there was really a great air of comfort throughout, and by Charlotte's evident enjoyment of it, Elizabeth supposed he must often be forgotten. So Charlotte likes that she has a house and that she has all these things and nice furnishings, and Elizabeth's like, well, maybe she is happy here. Maybe Mr. Collins is forgotten most of the time, right? She had already learned that Lady Catherine was still in the country. It was spoken of again while they were at dinner, when Mr. Collins, joining in, observed, yes, Miss Elizabeth, you will have the honor of seeing Lady Catherine de Bourgh on the ensuing Sunday at church, and I need not say you will be delighted with her. She is all affability and condescension, and I doubt not but you will be honored with some portion of her notice when service is over. I have scarcely any hesitation in saying that she will include you and my sister Maria in every invitation with which she honors us during your stay here. Her behavior to my dear Charlotte is charming. We dine at Rosings twice every week and are never allowed to walk home. Her ladyship's carriage is regularly ordered for us. I should say one of her ladyship's carriages, for she has several. Oh, okay. Lady Catherine is a very respectable, sensible woman indeed, added Charlotte, and a most attentive neighbor. Very true, my dear. That is exactly what I say. She is the sort of woman whom one cannot regard with too much deference. The evening was spent chiefly in talking over Hertfordshire news and telling again what had been already written, and when it closed, Elizabeth, in the solitude of her chamber, had to meditate upon Charlotte's degree of contentment, to understand her address in guiding and composure in bearing with her husband, and to acknowledge that it was all done very well. She had also to anticipate how her visit would pass, the quiet tenor of their usual employments, the vexatious interruptions of Mr. Collins, and the gaieties of their intercourse with Rosings. A lively imagination soon settled it all. About the middle of the next day, as she was in her room getting ready for a walk, a sudden noise below seemed to speak the whole house in confusion, and after listening a moment, she heard somebody running up the stairs in a violent hurry and calling out after her. She opened the door and met Maria in the landing place, who, breathless with agitation, cried out, "Oh, my dear Eliza, pray make haste and come into the dining room, for there is such a sight to be seen. I would not tell you what it is. Make haste and come down this moment." Elizabeth asked questions in vain. Maria would tell her nothing more, and down they ran into the dining room, which fronted the lane, in quest of this wonder. It was two ladies stopping in a low phaeton at the garden gate. "And is this all?" cried Elizabeth. "I expected at least that the pigs were got into the garden. Here is nothing but Lady Catherine and her daughter." "La, my dear," said Maria, quite shocked at the mistake. "It is not Lady Catherine. The old lady is Mrs. Jenkinson, who lives with them. The other is Miss de Bourgh. Only look at her. She is quite a little creature, and who would have thought she could be so thin and small?" "She is abominably rude to keep Charlotte out of doors in all this wind. Why does she not come in?" "Oh, Charlotte says she hardly ever does. It is the greatest of favors when Miss de Bourgh comes in." I like her appearance, said Elizabeth, struck with other ideas. She looked sickly and cross. Yes, she will do for him very well. She will make him a very proper wife. She's talking about Darcy. You know what? For as much as Elizabeth doesn't care about Darcy, he comes up in her thoughts pretty often, right? And so I don't know. So she's saying that Miss de Bourgh, who is there visiting, will make him a very proper wife because she's rude, you know. And then she's, I don't know, she's just different. Mr. Collins and Charlotte were both standing at the gate in conversation with the ladies, and Sir William, to Elizabeth's high diversion, was stationed in the doorway in earnest contemplation of the greatness before him, and constantly bowing whenever Mr. Berg looked that way. At length there was nothing more to be said. The ladies drove on, and the others returned into the house. Mr. Collins no sooner saw the two girls than he began to congratulate them on their good fortune, which Charlotte explained by letting them know that the whole party was asked to dine at Rosings the next day. So Mr. Collins was like, oh, you are so lucky. They invited all of us, including you, to go dine at their house or with their mansion. Excuse me.